of Supervisors to order, please. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing. That will be followed by a moment of silent reflection. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
thank you. We will have the reading of the notice, please.
The adjourned annual meeting of the Marathon County Board of Supervisors, composed of 38 members, will convene at the Marathon County Courthouse Assembly Room, 500 Forest Street, on Tuesday, December 13th at 7 p.m., and the agenda was duly signed and posted.
Thank you. I would like to request everyone, please silence your cell phones and any other electronic devices as to not be an interruption to the meeting, and I thank you for your compliance. And we'll proceed to roll call. I would request everyone please sign in. Supervisor Seafield? Okay. All right, we will proceed. And I'd like to welcome all of the visitors that we have, including the viewing audience. And we will move on to to public comment. We've had two individuals request time to address the board. So the public comment is not to exceed 15 minutes. We'll have 7.5 minutes allocated to each person, no more than. First person that is requested to address the board is Joanne Leonard. Joanne Leonard, please.
Don't worry, is it on?
There you go.
Okay.
Thank you.
Don't worry, I won't be talking 7.5 minutes. It's more like 2 minutes. Good evening. My name is Joanne Leonard. I live at 923 Maple Hill Road in Wausau. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in opposition to reappointment of Sharon Hunter and Michelle Van Cray to the Marathon County Library Board. I do not believe they represent a diverse and concerned population in Marathon County. Ms. Hunter, as chair of the library board, was dismissive of individuals giving public comment at recent board meetings. Example, I was alarmed September 19th at the first public comment period. 11 individuals signed up were told, instead of the 2 minutes we thought we only had 1 minute for comments because the board agenda only allowed 10 minutes. Is that reasonable? I was shocked. Then after the meeting, I was informed by Ms. Hunter that the library board doesn't have to give an opportunity for public comment. In other words, just be happy we were given the 1 minute. That doesn't sound like a person who is interested in listening to the taxpayers in this county. So I oppose the reappointment of Ms. Hunter. Supervisor Van Cray was in lockstep with the chair and voted unanimously to leave the sexualized books as defined by state statute crimes against children, sections 948.10 and 948.11, in question out of the juvenile section of the library and moved to the adult section. Totally opposed it. I oppose the reappointment of Ms. Van Cray. Who is the library board looking out for? Certainly not the children of Marathon County. The board had several options, as several were presented by the public, to keep the children in this county safe. If you as a county board member have not investigated what has taken place recently with the people you appointed to the board, I think it would be worthwhile for you to do so. The taxpayers in this county elected you to protect all citizens in this county, including children. Thank you for your time.
Next, we have Shantiz Tarpey. Tarpey?
Good evening, County Supervisors. In July of 2023, Emily Drabinsky, a self-proclaimed Marxist, let that sink in, will take over as the president of the American Library Association. Posts on her Twitter feed openly show that she supports drag queen events which expose children to sexually explicit activities, as well as pushing explicit materials within the library on unwilling taxpayers. Make no mistake, she was elected to silence the voices of parents like me, who are protesting inappropriate books that are harmful to children. The American Library Association drives the training of U.S. libraries and the use of public funds, so if you think for 1 second that this election will not have an impact on Wausau, you are sadly mistaken. Think again. And that's why I'm asking you right now to oppose the appointments of Administrator Leonard's candidates to sit on the Library Board of Trustees. While I am sure that Ms. Hunter, Ms. Van Crane, and Ms. Palmer are very lovely people, I have zero confidence in them to be able to stand up under the pressure that will be coming their way. I say this based on personal experience with 2 of them. After the September 19th Board of Trustees meeting, where a large group of concerned citizens showed up, many of which voiced their concerns about materials harmful to children located in our library, Ms. Hunter stated that she did not have to allow public comment and could get rid of it. This showed a lack of care and concern for the very public that she is serving. The library itself claims to be a reflection of the community, and yet Ms. Hunter threatened to stop listening to the community. Instead of embracing our voices, she shows reluctant compliance. In an email I sent to the entire Board of Trustees asking them to consider rearranging the way the books are shelved in order to control access to materials that children should not have access to, Ms. Van Crane demonstrated no leadership and punted on the issue. She stated that she was not a librarian and did not feel comfortable making such decisions, completely missing the point of her job to provide leadership and oversight to the library. As for Ms. Palmer, I do not know her, so while I'm not advocating for a no vote at this time, I'm asking for a slow vote until we know if she is willing and able to stand for the values of Marathon County and the children of Marathon County, or if she's just going to be a shill for the American Library Association. For such a time as this, we need strong people in positions of leadership on the Library Board of Trustees. According to her own YouTube videos, the new director of the American Library Association is already teaching other librarians how to subvert and inject politics and sexuality into their publicly funded works. I am pleading with this Board of Supervisors to only approve people who are going to stand for the values of this community and protect our children. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will move on to educational presentation and/or reports. Item number B. Under B8, we have board member opportunity to offer items for consideration in the 2023 Administrator's Work Plan. I will turn it over to the Administrator. Administrator Leonard, please.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. So we have very recently wrapped up my favorite time of the year, which is budget time, and we jump into my second favorite time of the year, which is putting together the annual work plan based on all of the items that each of your standing committees have been discussing, and then I will take all of that information and bring that to not only the executive committee, but also the certainly the full board, who gets to weigh in on that work plan and prioritize the work of staff during this coming year. So I'll be very brief, but my request of all of you as I do that, if you do have certain things that you don't believe have been raised at a committee and you would like me to at least include them for prioritization by the full board, feel free to send me an email. I can tell you that at all of your standing committees, I am there. I'm trying to look through and catch all the items that you reference within your individual committees that you want to tackle during the year, and I try to work those things into the work plan, but I am human, and I certainly will undoubtedly miss some things. So if you do send me an email, I'll do my best to get it in the work plan. My ask of the executive committee and of the full board, of course, is going to be please do your best to prioritize our work, as was the case in last year's work plan and the years that preceded it. I think we overestimate our ability to get things done and our capacity. So I think we need to, as I frequently say to staff, in order to be effective, we must be selective. So That's my pitch, Mr. Chair. If anyone has anything, like I said, they certainly can send me an email or come to my office and discuss what their desire and priority would be within the work plan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And so we'll move on to the next item, and that is the West Side Master Plan presentation. And Administrator Leonard, please.
I'm just going to start. So I just asked for a couple minutes. Jamie and Jason are really going to provide I'd say the lion's share, but I'm going to say virtually all of the information here today. I just asked for a couple minutes to provide you a little bit of context for my role as the administrator, what confluence of events led to this master plan effort over the last 18 months for the area that we call the West Side. So today you're going to hear, as I said, from Jamie and from Jason. Jason is from MSA, our consultant. They're going to answer a lot of questions for you, and I hope you have a lot of questions for them as you, over the next couple of months, really deliberate what our vision for Marathon Park and that West Side is going to be. But one of the things they're going to talk about is what is a master plan. I mean, they're going to go through a couple of things to start before they get into their lion's share of information, but what is a master plan? And you're going to hear that a master plan is a long-term planning document. If you think back to the Wisconsin Counties Association and they said, what are you all as supervisors? One of the ways you act as visionaries is through those long-range planning documents. This is one of those. It's one of those documents that gives us as staff guidance as we put together our operational plans and our construction plans or capital plans that you as the county board will have the opportunity to review through your annual budget and during the year through budget allocations, but it's very important. One other thing that they'll talk about in the context of what is a master plan is an important idea that while they are important and there are those long-term planning documents, they're based on the best information all of you have and we as staff have at any given time. But the one thing I will guarantee about any master plan, at least based on my experience, is that they always change. Every master plan that I've ever seen has changed. They'll also talk to you about the process of master planning, and I think it's an important process. They'll talk about that in connection of the work they've done with the West Side Plan, importance of getting feedback from the public. You'll hear about that. You'll hear about their efforts with the public, with stakeholder groups, focusing on data usage data on park usage. They'll talk to you about how they went through the Park Commission and how they got feedback there, and how they're going to work with this body through the Environmental Resources Committee, through the HR Finance and Property Committee, and through the full board. They'll also talk to you about why this plan is before you and what are those next steps. So again, you're going to hear about that process. You're going to hear about really the very important role that I referenced before that you as policymakers have. You are responsible for considering all of that information and ultimately, should you deem it appropriate, adopting a master plan. That is your role. Staff, we try to gather information, put the best information before you, but again, that's your role. Certainly that citizen input is important. Certainly that stakeholder input that Jamie and Jason are going to talk to you about, the role that we had with the UW campus, reaching out to all of the user groups, the local school districts, the fair board, all that's important, but it can't take away from your role as county board members, as the County Board of Supervisors to adopt that plan. Just like that wonderful document off to my left, the county board through the Park Commission in 1919 did their work adopting that plan. And the board from 2007, 2008, the Marathon County Board, did the same thing, and Jamie's going to show you that some documents, some images from that master plan. This is your role this term to consider the information before you. So why are we here? We're here for you to, as I alluded to before, ask questions, think about that plan, go back to the ERC committee and to HR Finance, allow for further consideration. I hope our process that we've outlined and working with Chair Langenhahn at ERC and Chair Robinson at the HR Finance and Property Committee gives you time to think about it. I mean, our goal is to bring this back in March. Think about the plan, offer suggestions, gather information from your constituents. So that's what Jason and Jamie are going to talk to you about. I wanted just a couple minutes to talk about the factual side from my perspective. Again, the confluence of events that came together to make now the time for a refresh, as I'll call it, of the existing master plan, or a revisioning of that master plan. And that there are three things I think that come together and show that. First, and Dr. Toms is here from the university. She's just right outside the door. But the first thing is really the university property itself. You're going to hear a little bit about the process that Jamie went through. It's certainly all of the university property, but most notably, we're talking about one of those things, if you think about it like a Venn diagram, a three-circle Venn diagram, one of those circles is the university property, most notably the dorm or the residence hall. For those of you that have been on the board for a decade, the great news, you've been talking about the dorm for the entire time you've been on the board. It's in a challenging situation. It needs some pretty substantial renovations if it's going to continue to be used for housing. It's not being used for housing right now. My office has housing analyses for that building going back to at least 2013. So this is not a new issue, but it's one of those three circles, and I want to give you just a little bit of insight on why it's timely. Well, in 2020, based on the master plan that had existed, as Jamie will show you, that residence hall was part of that 2007 plan. And in fact, that 2007 plan said keep having that for student housing. It envisioned the university also expanding. Well, Jamie's going to show you some things have changed, right? Master plans are based, as I said before, on the best information we had. The situation now is different than what it was in 2007. In 2020, based on the information in that 07 master plan, myself, as well as staff from facilities and capital management, the people that take care of our buildings, and the good news and the bad news, all of us, the county, all of you, have control over the dormitory. All of the buildings on the UW campus are county-owned buildings. So the challenge of that dormitory is our challenge, our collective challenge. So in 2020, we sat down, we worked with the university, Dr. Ann Herder-Rapp at the time, and based on that master plan, we went out and said, if we were going to keep using this for student housing, we did an evaluation of the building, we talked to local contractors, made sure we put out an RFP, a request for proposal, seeking a public-private partnership. County owns the buildings. We were essentially looking for anyone who was willing to rehab those buildings to use them for not only student housing, but also we put our RFP together. Hey, if you need to have some market rate housing in there, that's fine. Give us a proposal. We met with local contractors. We walked them through the building. We answered all the questions. And when that deadline came for that request for proposal, we had 0 responses. We sought feedback from those contractors, and what we heard wasn't something that shocked us. It was that, hey, this building is a challenge. The footprint of that property is small. There are limitations to what you can do with it. So based on that, and the fact that the 2007 plan said keep doing housing, we sat down with the university and they kind of revisited their priorities. And the feedback we got from Dr. Ann Herder-Rapp at the time was, you know what, we don't need, our student housing needs, perhaps a better way to say it, our student housing needs are being met in the broader context of our housing available. So it's not an ongoing necessity for that to be student housing. So that's a game changer. That's why it's in one of those three circles in my confluence of events that I talked about before that make this timely. The second circle is something that the Infrastructure Committee has been talking about for a great many years. And in fact, it too goes back to the 2007 master plan for the west side, and that's the Highway Department. We've been talking about relocating the Highway Department for as long as I've been in administration, and it turns out you guys have been talking about it all the way back to 2007 and probably before. The 2007 plan has the Highway Department leaving, no longer being located on that piece of property. We've been working on that as staff intermittently, but certainly in 2017, 18, and 19 that picked up. We had in 2019, just as an example, the county board in December of 2019 voted, was considering whether or not to purchase a piece of property to relocate the Highway Department. And in December of 2019, based on some of the challenges with respect to that piece of property, the county board actually voted that down. But this desire to relocate the Highway Department has been and continues to be one of the pieces, the central pieces of that West Side Master Plan. Why it's in the second circle, again, of a confluence of events, we've also talked about relocating the Parks Department with Highway. Well, the 2007 plan has Highway moving, but it takes Parks and puts them right where Highway was. So again, another reason why I think it was timely in 2020 to take a fresh look at kind of this master plan itself. And then the last circle that I'll talk about is really the park itself. And Jamie's going to talk about this. And when I say the park itself, I really, the most particular piece or most specific piece of the park that I'm talking about is really the ice sheets, the ice assets we have. Jamie shared this at ERC and at the Human Resource Finance and Property Committee. The ice making equipment you have in that facility was purchased more than 40 years ago, and it was used when you bought it. So we're doing our best to keep it running, but we need a plan as to whether to replace in its current situation, its current location, or something else. And the other thing Jamie will talk about, there are some limitations to that facility. We can't do year-round ice, despite an apparent need for it. So all those things have came together, I should say, in 2020 to make the county board, at least in my estimation, to see value through its 2021 budgeting process to say, hey, let's do a new West Side Master Plan. So that's, from my perspective, the big picture, why we're here. I went on longer than I wanted to, but that's the big picture, why we're here, and I wanted to just provide that context before Jamie and Jason come up and they'll walk you through all the slides within your packet. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Jamie?
All right, well, I think Lance really covered it. I guess our work is done. No, thank you for having me up here today. We kind of took a step back. Originally, the plan was to come to County Board tonight. This was our plan to have this plan adopted by the end of the year, but really taking it through the different committees and then realizing the last time we were in front of this County Board with this and the presentation on the West Side Master Plan and our plan going forward for the year was in March of this year, and probably about half of you weren't elected yet until April. So that made us think that we need to come back to the county board and do more of a take a step back educational piece on what is this for. Lance teed it up really, really well on what his direction to us was and why this was on my work plan to do. So we're going to talk through kind of the history of it. I've got a lot of history slides in there, and I just want to kind of drive home the fact of this park is very old. It's near and dear to the city. It's the staple of Wausau, and we want to look at it going forward as well as the surrounding communities around it. So one of the reasons why this is referred to as the West Side Master Plan is because when the Highway Department was first built in the area that it was, with the first building there, Marathon Park and that highway, that road 17th Avenue, was the west side of Wausau. There was not, it was farmland beyond that. So this is the west side of Wausau, which really isn't, it's the near west side now and not necessarily the west side anymore, but it's still the West Side Master Plan. So we're first going to look at how this area has changed and what opportunities we've identified going through this master plan. So one of the things you'll see before this slide is that plan over, as Lance referenced, is an original drawing from 1919. Of the park planning. There are campgrounds in there, there's the water feature, the exhibition building still there. The racetrack, you'll notice in many of these pictures, was a predominant piece of this park. So 1919 is the first plan we have. Then, looking at the aerials that we have of this park, 1938 is the next one we have. And here you can see, that the county received this park from the Agricultural Society in 1921. As I mentioned, the racetrack is a big piece. The exhibition building is there. Most of the area to the south, West Street, was undeveloped at that time. The Ironworks building is there in 1938, and so is the first highway building. was in that spot. Then, moving on to 1969, so about 30 years later, you'll notice that the track is still there, so still going strong. Exhibition building is there. There's more fair buildings being added at this point, more livestock pavilions. The second cow barn is there. You'll notice even back in the 1938, the tennis court was already in the middle of that track. You can see it better in 1969, in addition to kind of the outline or starting of some baseball fields. So it was heavily used for multiple different things besides the fair as it is today. Eastgate Hall was also built within that 30 years between the 38 and 69. Martin Luther King actually spoke there in 1967 in that building, which I have a picture of later. So, and then here you'll see that the majority of West Street now is being built up with the cold storage building, a couple of more county facilities, and the first little park shop was put on that spot. So going to 1996, this is what I remember from being, in high school and showing at the fair during these times. This is the park I remember. There was no racetrack. I could not find the exact date of when our racetrack was taken out, but it had been taken out somewhere between that 68 and 96. It was heavily used for baseball. Our Little League used those fields quite often. The tennis courts were added to, the horse arena was added, and you'll notice, one thing I wanted to point out back in the 69 is that this area that's now all gravel did actually have a median with trees in it in 69. By 96, the area and most of the park was gravel, which is part of the reason why we're looking at this plan and how we're developing this park as well. Most of the development you do in the city, if a business wanted to come in and build a building today and they wanted to try to keep a gravel parking lot, that would not fly. It's against city code to have a gravel parking lot. So we have a huge park in the middle of the city that is predominantly gravel with very little pavement, which has its challenges in and of itself. One of the reasons why we're looking at this too is that area is open wide. There's a lot of speeding that goes on through the park. We get a lot of complaints from the people that are trying to park along the edges of the different cars coming through. There's not a traffic calming. The park in the middle is not a very safe place to be at the moment. So looking forward, West Street hasn't changed a whole lot since 68 to 96, maybe a few more buildings. And then you get to 2005, the Parks Department was added onto. That's the majority of our building at this time. The ice arenas, well, they were back in 1996 as well. So our first sheet, as Lance mentioned, was built in 1974, and the refrigeration system and the boards that were in there that we just replaced 2 years ago were bought used from Eagle River back in 1974. We did have a small revamp of a few of the valves and a compressor, or not a compressor, but a sub pump back in 2016, but the compressors are still those original compressors. The brine system throughout the facility is still the original brine system. And then the second sheet was built in 1985. So going forward, 2005, you can see the ball fields start to go away. We do not currently have any ball fields in there right now. The grandstand was added onto. The stage is still here in 2005. That was then removed in 2016. So we get to where we are today. This is the park area that you'll see. This is the park we have today. Big green space. The stage is gone. So when the fair comes in or we have any performances in there, we bring in a portable stage. We still have a lot of gravel, and not much else has changed there. So this is why we're looking at what is the future of this area. Also, when we look at this, we looked at our aging infrastructures. We do have the university over to the east, and then we have this area on West Street where now that cold storage building you just approved in your last budget, with this last budget, that cold storage building will be removed because it was damaged by a fire and it has to be removed, so that will be coming down, leaving that area option for redevelopment. So what is the purpose of a master plan? The purpose of a master plan is really that long-range planning document that is that conceptual layout. It is putting the pictures to paper where you can visualize what the potential could be. It's not a final construction drawing. It's not just engineered drawings, it's a concept for what that vision could be. And what makes a successful master plan is really being able to effectively explain how that site and that plan is going to be developed over time, what are the different ways it's going to be developed, and how you can see the area possibly taking shape. So, as Lance mentioned, we have done master planning in the past. Besides the 1919 one that we have there, we did do a master plan for Marathon Park specific in 1940, 1963, and then the last one that the county board did that included more of than the park with the university and West Street was 2007, 2008. That planning process went through the same planning process that Jason is going to go through that we went through with this process. 4 different options were identified there. The conclusion was this preferred option in 2007 that, as Lance mentioned, has a new dormitory actually here, so expansion of that. It had the arts building being built. It has a few new facilities in the park, as well as redeveloping West Street. So it reconfigures those buildings, or takes down the existing buildings, makes new ones all along West Street to really make this an expansion of the park. If you look at the 2007 plan, which if anyone's interested in it, I have it. You can come and read it if you like. But it really had 4 different elements that needed to go together to make this a successful plan. One is to build on the unique natural assets and identity of Marathon Park. Marathon Park has a history to it. It's got, beautiful white pines, which we'll talk about in a little later, and it's got a country kind of feel in the middle of the city. It's something that's a gem to this area. The second element that needs to go along, these all need to go together to help this vision. It's build relationships to identify and acquire land as it becomes available. So the cold storage site, which is part of this plan, that was purchased by the county after this plan. We need to foster a vibrant campus district that draws investment and also serves the immediate community. So how does the university tie in with the entire area? And we need to unlock the new county services or educational opportunities, which is administration offices, resident hall, the courts, athletic fields. So in the plan, it talks about the major components. One of those is the significant expansion to Marathon Park activities. So that's some athletic fields. That's looking at the multipurpose building, which is our ice arenas. It's looking at some of those buildings, just like we are looking at now, that are included in this plan to see what we can do for revenue generation. It also, as we mentioned, talked about the consolidation of the Parks Department, or moving that to the highway area, and then, as I mentioned, the UW expansion. So, this is the wrong one that I sent you, but anyway. What's taken place since then is these 2 items up here. The regional learning facility was constructed. Marathon Park Amphitheater was renovated. That's when the stage came out and seating was added. The other 2 things is a new horse barn was built as part of that plan, and the purchase of the cold storage area, which I had mentioned earlier. So, Lance kind of went over this slide already in the beginning, so I don't need to go through it too much. But what's changed since 2007? Vision of the university's changed, especially with student housing. We still want to consolidate some departments. That may change again as we are looking for sites. And, looking at even the medical examiner's office that's on West Street, looking at doing a different facility. Emergency management has entered into agreement with the City of Wausau, so that may change some of their location. I've actually been working with Phil from emergency management to identify how any one of these new facilities that are part of this plan, whether it's the Junction, an ice arena, or one of our facilities that we currently have, how we can partner together to also provide a safe room. As emergency management, there's funding available at the federal and state levels for these safe rooms that communities are building now. The city of Spencer just received over $3 million to go towards their athletic dome, because it's a safe room as well, and it's a place where the community has, in a large natural disaster event or even a large storm, for big events like the fair has 12,000 people there at any one given day. If there was a huge storm that goes through, this would be a facility, it's all going to be based on size, and there's still work that has to be done with it, but it's something that he's very interested in. And he could even be housed out of there with a new emergency management location, because he's in I think the EOC is in the basement of City Hall at the moment, so there's opportunity in the future there. So looking at the project area, we already mentioned, it's basically 3, UWSP at Wausau campus, the redevelopment area on West Street, and Marathon Park. So the next slide is just looking at the general purposes of what this master plan will be for. It includes the plan to use the lands and the structures, how we're gonna maintain them, we're gonna change them. It helps with our capital project planning for the next 10 to 15 years, and it allows us to look at our facilities and the uses of all of our facilities, whether it's the university, redevelopment, or the park, and how we can increase revenue. So that's another part of what I've been tasked with for my department, is to look at a sustainability plan for our department as a whole, and how do we increase our revenue, decrease our expenses, and reduce that tax levy. Marathon Park is one of those revenue-generating facilities that the county has, whether it's the rental of park facilities, the rental of ice that is we have now, whether it's the fair that comes in and draws economic development in there. It's a lot of things there that draw economic development and revenue for this county. Right now, of our revenue that we generate in our department, timber sales are number 1, camping is number 2, and ice rental is number 3. So those are our top revenue sources in our budget. So the specific questions we asked, that's already mentioned too. So in order to get to those questions, we hired MSA Professional Services, and I'm now going to turn this over to Jason Valeris to talk about the plan and the process.
All right, hello. First, a moment of thank you. A moment of kind of introduction of myself and our team, so you know just a bit about where we're coming from. I'm a certified planner, community planner, urban planner, with about 20 years experience doing community plans, community engagement, development and redevelopment planning, so very site-specific urban type work, but also park plans. And that's the type of work that I do on a regular basis. The key folks in our team, and this project was really led more by senior staff, and the work produced by senior staff include Rain Gardner, who's our lead parks-focused engineer, Dan Williams, who is our lead landscape architect, and then Plunkett Research Architects, PRA, we're also part of our team. Mike Barr, pictured there on the right, is one of their senior architects and was part of the plan back in 2007 that PRA, Plunkett Research, led back then. And so that's our kind of multidisciplinary perspective and group that we brought to this process. But our experience and our credentials, I think, are much less critical to the credibility and success of this process than the local stakeholders and constituents that were involved in this process. And so that started with the steering committee. The steering committee for this effort was predominantly county staff, so key county committees, our staff departments, the facilities department, clearly the parks department, the planning department, all of them represented throughout this process. We also had, as mentioned, the campus executive for UW-Stevens Point, Wausau, and the city of Wausau was represented. What happens in this park obviously affects and is affected by current operations and future plans and intentions for the city, and so they too were an important stakeholder. There were a number of other groups that weren't necessarily directly on that steering committee, but that we saw as critical. And so some of those were other departments that we reached out to talk to, neighborhood associations, athletic organizations that use the park, various operational components of the park, such as the fair board in particular, but also some of the concessions and the operation of the campground, some of which is coming through the Parks Department. So those are a number of groups that we recognized early on were critical, and that we interviewed folks from those organizations, or ensured that we had connected with them in some way. The schedule, to roughly break it into thirds, we had about a third of the year, because this started in early '22, that we spent collecting information, looking through all the buildings, talking to all these stakeholders, and getting feedback. We spent the summer, late spring through the summer, working on designs of different ideas for the future of the planning area. And this fall, we've been kind of vetting and refining and talking with county committees and county staff about kind of refining and finalizing the plan. The methods by which we reached out to people, I talked about the interviews, and those were critical, starting with time spent with each of the steering committee members to really understand where they're coming from and the needs and interests of their department and what they know about each of the parts of the study area. We did a community survey, which was very strongly responded to in terms of the number of people that took that survey. We had a public meeting at the point that we started to have a series of different concepts to consider. We hosted a public meeting at Eastgate Hall in May, and as I said, we've been visiting. We visited at several points in the process county committees. I want to give you an overview of some of what we heard from the community survey, because I think there's some noteworthy feedback that we got from the community. This word cloud is a representation of what we got in open-ended responses, people typing in answers to the question of what they feel is the park's most important feature or activity for them. And so those words that were used repeatedly by lots of people are the ones that come to the fore in this word cloud. And the big one that jumps out is walking. A lot of people use that park to walk their dogs, maybe to go for a jog to get some exercise. So that's a very common park use. Not surprisingly, a lot of people associate the park with the fair and see that as the most important thing to them. The ice use, and it kind of looks like it says ice trail. Those are two separate words that are not intentionally linked there, but the ice use is a prominent and important use right now within the park. And then the trails kind of ties to the walking people appreciate, and they use the various trails and places to walk within the park. We asked people to get more specific in our closed-ended questions about what they do in the park. And first it was, what do you do at least once in the park each year? And again, the number one thing is walking or running in the park. And tied with that, people come to the park for the fair. Playgrounds out in the park and picnicking, we're also rounding out the top 5. And then for what uses do people come to the park frequently? Who are our frequent flyers, so to speak? Indoor hockey and ice skating tops that list, followed closely by walking and running. And then rounding out that list, dog walking, playgrounds, and pickleball. The park amenities most in need of improvement, according to respondents, top of that list is the parking. And most of the comments that illustrate what they were thinking about and saying that tended to focus on the aesthetics or condition of the parking. I think people associate all that gravel area as a key parking area and don't really like either how it looks or what it's like to use that at times, because it can be kind of muddy and unpleasant. Restrooms, playgrounds, ice arena, and picnic areas round out that list. We did ask, again, this is one of our key questions of us in this process, to help inform what the county should do with Marathon Hall, and we gave people some opportunity to weigh in on that. The most preferred response to our options were to let the county decide based on professional advice. A fewer than that thought just to direct, go ahead, please, tear it down and redevelop it, or reuse it if profitable, a smaller group than that, and then the smallest group, reuse it at any cost. And then we also asked about the area south of the park. What could or should that area along West Street be used for? By far the most popular answers are recreational uses. Those are the sorts of uses that the general public sees as of greatest benefit to them personally as compared to uses that they might not themselves necessarily use. We've got some comments here that reflect the point in the process when we had concepts to share. And so in May, we had a series of 4 concepts that we presented at a public meeting that we had out on the project website. And we had gone back to all of the groups that we interviewed, those kind of frequent users, stakeholders, and asked them to react to those concepts and specifically kind of react to various features that were important components of the park. A few things that we learned without reading this whole list. There is a strong pickleball constituency, and we heard from those players. And we do recognize that pickleball is a popular sport. The camping in the park, some people like that it's there, some people think it doesn't make sense there, so we kind of saw mixed opinions about that. Some of those features that people come to the park for recreation, especially families with children, the train loop, the playgrounds, the splash pad, all of those were recognized as highly desirable features of the park. And one other thing I'll point out from this slide is just to highlight that the trees are a feature that people frequently comment on and value and ask that they be protected. Your turn.
So after reviewing all the input and kind of looking back at the area, to determine what has happened and how we need to look at the park going forward, I again, wanted to look back a little bit at the uses of the park and the fact that the activities have changed. So racing was these grandstands are packed in this picture, but what else was there going on in the city at that time when the majority of the land around it was farmland? So this was the pastime that people came here for. So the uses have changed for that. And then, as you can see in this aerial, the development around John Muir is there because the round building is part of that, but the land around the park was largely undeveloped. And then you can see the trees. Here, they're not very big. They're actually like full trees and not just top-heavy pines. But that's, what's changed. Look at what's changed in Marathon Park. Really, this is just an illustration of the fact that our park, these are just 2 very significant events that were one-time events that have happened in the park that we were able to accommodate. The picture on the left is Martin Luther King Jr. speaking at Eastgate Hall in 1967. The picture on the right is George W. Bush speaking here, I don't know the date, but early 2000s. He was actually here, according to the pictures, on a campaign rally for another candidate. But the facilities are built right now to accommodate really large groups, maybe one-time groups or events like this that our community can't hold elsewhere, that's what the park is used for. Maybe it's bigger events regularly, or maybe it's a series of small events or one-time small events, but we want to look at the future that this park could still be a place for activities like that. And then, looking at how we move forward. The train is a staple of the park. Train is also a loop right now, so the plan that we'll shows it being expanded. But it's also a question is, should we keep the train? Is it something that we feel is important to this park? The trees, whether we like it or not, our trees are beyond their years. Every storm event that we have, we lose at least 2 dozen of those white pines. And every time we lose 2 dozen, we open up more of the space, allowing more trees to go down. So the canopy of that park over time will change. We will not be recommending at any point to go in and do any type of management or clear cut of those trees because I do want to keep my job. But we have to be realistic that those trees are really old. And so as much as we can save the trees and protect the trees that are there, we also need to replant throughout that park to try to keep that canopy and diversify the canopy that's in the park. So that's something we consider as we build anything. You know, that's one of the questions about the campground is it safe to have a campground there? We do have it in the plan to keep the campground at this time because it's very important to the fair. It is a revenue source, but it's also something that we don't take lightly when storms are coming. We have staff that goes round and round to anybody that's in the park to let them know to move to shelter and that sort of thing because the trees are unpredictable in some areas. And then we want this park to be a family place. So we've been updating playgrounds. To what extent do we want to continue to do that? And then the one thing I had to throw in there, because I found these pictures, I thought it was kind of neat. Even on that 1919 plan back there, a water feature was central to Marathon Park. I don't have the date for the upper left picture. It's somewhere before 1971, but there was a waiting area there. And then that middle thing got moved, and we still had a waiting area. So over time, it has changed. There's reasons why it changed from being a wading pool to a splash pad. We have the opportunity to, our splash pad has reached its useful life. It was built in 2004. So it's almost 20 years old. It needs to be replaced. The water system part of it is something that we struggle with every year. So it's reached its useful life. The plan that we have proposes to replace the splash pad with different features. A splash pad does not need to be staffed, so it's a cost to us. Any type of wading pool or anything with 2 inches of standing water or more needs to have lifeguards to it. So we need that to take into consideration. But a water feature has been part of this park for over 100 years. So I'm going to turn this back over to Jason to talk about some of the preliminary findings and then we'll get to the plan, a couple short slides.
So before we even started developing concepts, we synthesized what we've been hearing from people. And I want to repeat some of those findings because they really were the starting point for the designs that we did initially propose, and they carry through into what is the final concept that we're currently talking about. First, focused on the park, it's critical to continue to note that this is the home of the Wisconsin Valley Fair. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. There are features within the park that are important to maintain. We've been talking about the pines, the stone entrance features, the exhibition building, the judging pavilion and cattle bar number 1, both on the Registry as Historic Structures, Eastgate Hall, and the Little Red Schoolhouse. Those are all features in particular that we recognized right away we shouldn't change, need to be maintained. There are a few buildings within the park that aren't critical. They aren't really used. The pool cabin next to the splash pad is one of those. The shelter that's near the campground is another that really doesn't get much use, and so those are options for removal. And then we heard from a lot of different perspectives a desire to reduce that big gravel area in the heart of the park. Talking for a little bit, a moment more about the fair and its history. Jamie already mentioned that the park came to the county in under county ownership with the stipulation that it be the hosting site of an agricultural fair in perpetuity. And so that is critical to the park and to this plan. It is intended in that capacity to serve the entire county. And so we had that in mind throughout to make sure that the ideas that we were coming up with weren't putting in jeopardy in any way the continued successful function of the fair. As I've seen in this process, there's a very good working relationship between Jamie's department and the Fair Board to collaborate and cooperate on management of those structures to make sure that this site is working both as a park and as a fairground. Regarding the UW Stevens Point Wausau campus, a few things that were clear from the beginning. The lowest hanging fruit in this entire process, I would say, in terms of something to change. There's a parking lot on the north side of Stewart Ave that is not used at all. The campus's parking demand has dropped, and even when they had higher parking demand, it was rarely used because of its location across Stewart, and people didn't like to use that. And so campus was clear, they have no interest or need for it, and so that's a redevelopment opportunity for housing. Second bullet here talks about the West Arts Building. This one is actually out of date. It's since become clear that the campus is planning to bring back, I believe it's a glass blowing program to this campus, and so that building is intended for use again. Right now, it's been sitting vacant. And then finally, regarding Marathon Hall, we looked at the building in terms of its how it is designed, what its condition is, and we did some market analysis to consider, all right, what are the other things that the building might be useful, and what is the market for those uses. Our recommendation on that was to tear the building down. And that's driven especially by its condition and its design. It is, and as has been mentioned, there have been attempts to find some sort of adaptive reuse, and that's been not successful. So that was one of the things that we started with before we got into design, was that conclusion and recommendation. And then finally, the redevelopment area, which is our catch-all for everything south of the railroad tracks. We were advised and took as one of our assumptions that Parks and Highway would be relocated, and so it was our directive to consider other uses for those sites. We know that the rail line and the rail yard there are going to continue. So there were some ideas about, hey, is this really going to be here? Could we include this area more directly if we could somehow reduce or even eliminate that use? That's not really a viable option. That rail line, in fact, changed hands not long ago and is actively used on a regular basis. None of the buildings in that area were considered off limits for consideration for redevelopment. And as we looked at new uses that could be viable, again, talking about our market research efforts, things that we didn't see as viable for predominant use in that area were retail, lodging, and heavy industry. But after crossing those off the list, and we didn't entirely cross off retail, but for everything other than the 17th Ave frontage, we crossed off retail. Everything else was still on the table then. Residential, service businesses, office, light manufacturing, storage, and indoor sports, and outdoor sports were still all on the menu. So that brings us finally, I'm kind of skipping past the group of concepts to focus on the current and final consolidated concept that's kind of been through the process over the past 6 months. And I'm just going to point out a few things here, and then Jamie's going to jump in and point out a few more. The things I want to focus on are the answers that this plan offers to the questions that were asked of us at the beginning. So one of those is, what do we do with Marathon Hall? As I said, our recommendation is tear it down, and in place of that, we see that as a viable and appropriate site for a multi-story residential building. Not necessarily, it would not be campus housing. Again, the campus isn't interested in housing dedicated to the campus, though it's conceivable that it could serve some students. And beyond that, we consider it, it could be purely market rate. There could be an affordable income qualified component to it, though we haven't specified that in the plan. The simple answer there is housing. Another question was what to do with the redevelopment area south of the tracks, and the plan shows for all of the county-owned land to the west end out towards 17th Ave. The suggestion here is that would be a set of sports-focused uses. So the building that you're seeing at the corner of West and 17th is intended as a replacement of the ice use of the multipurpose buildings within the park. And so that's an indoor ice and field sports facility with a bit of a retail frontage attached to that along 17th. and then behind that, or to the east of that, a field sports and court sports area. One of the things that became clear the more we talked to stakeholder groups, we had originally tried to keep the court sports in the center of the park because the pickleball group was clearly asking for that, but its location in the center of the park really is kind of an impediment to the flexibility of the park, and in particular to being able to work with the fair operations. And so while it would not be an immediate change, the eventual desire is to pull the court sports out of the park. At the other end, here on the east, where the current parks facilities operations are, we're suggesting redevelopment there as housing. And so those footprints you're seeing there represent the idea of townhome housing in that location. Finally, the question of how do we kind of bring some more of a park-like feel back to the park and reduce the gravel. What you're seeing here is roadways more or less in their current location, but in that center of the park where there's a lot of that gravel right now, that would be replaced with more greenery and trees lining the improved roadways. And the area south of that, that's shown here in green, would be the new location for the Midway. One of the things that was very clear, and from talking to the Fair Board several times, is the importance of that Midway to their revenue and to their perceptions of the success of the fair. And so we wanted to be sure that we had a central location for that. And we revised it to make it more central based on their feedback, and we ensured that it is a larger area than they currently have, going from 120,000 square feet of their current Midway footprint up to 135,000 square feet. And I also want to point out that while it may be kind of hard to see in this image, the northeast quadrant of the park up near the main portion of the university, there's a roadway through there right now and a variety of parking kind of perpendicular to that and a couple of lots up there. And the plan suggests removing that roadway. It's not really critical to movement within the park, and also that parking not really critical to the park. The main uses of that parking is really predominantly university students. And there's a lot there close to the university by the Big Kitchen shelter that would continue to be used by students, we expect. But the university has on-campus parking that could be used but isn't because of the way that the university charges for parking, in that they charge to park on campus, but they don't charge to park in the park. And so the plan advises some changes in how the university handles their parking fee structure to encourage use of the on-campus parking. That area in the northeast part of the park, then the pavement comes out of that, and that is allowed to be a larger green space that that enables expansion of the railroad track in particular.
So I also have to point out there is an updated plan that shows, that was supposed to be in the PowerPoint I sent Kim, but I must have grabbed the wrong one, that actually has a strip through the middle of this Midway area that is either gravel or some sort of a harder surface based on the input that we got from the fair as well for that Midway. So I do want to just point out one thing. We have talked with all the user groups. We do work very closely with the fair. Rick is on the fair board. He can attest to this. I am not going to say that the fair loves this plan. They are in support of having an open mind to making sure that I stick to my word, and that whatever is redeveloped in the next 15 to 20 years, that we make sure the fair is successful. But this plan is change, and so that is something that's hard to really grasp at the moment, because the fair has operated in a certain way for many, many years, and so it would be a rotation of some of that usage. But we feel very confident, and working with Jason and working with the Fair Board on multiple occasions, we feel very confident that we are providing a even better location for the fair, for its success, to tie in the livestock areas with the grandstand. But the next part of this is that it's on the next slide, is we can go back to the plan too, is basically that we prioritize all of these projects. The master plan, as I mentioned in the very beginning, is a vision for the future. It is not an engineered document. It's not officially designed. So what we do is we prioritize the projects that are on here as the opportunities come. everything in this plan is really contingent upon something else. The only thing that's not is some redevelopment of our existing buildings like the Eastgate Hall to make it, give it more acoustic, have it be better acoustics, maybe give it some paint. Those kind of things are things we can do now. The university housing is not contingent upon something else, but nothing can happen with the roadway and the redesign until the pickleball courts are moved because the fair midway has to go somewhere when those roads are down. The pickleball courts can't be moved until there's a spot for them to go. And we did just put money, the pickleball club, they just put a lot of money in them in the last 2 years. This is a long-term planning. We're not proposing to move them tomorrow. So this is we need to replace those surfaces, and we have that opportunity. Highway, as we mentioned, doesn't have anywhere to go at the moment, so it is not moving tomorrow. It is not moving this year. So therefore, the ice arena can't go there. But the ice arena is something that is in need of discussion for future planning because of the age of it. So whether it goes in a different location, goes off campus, we work with our user groups to figure out where that's going to go. That's something that needs to be addressed. But it can't be put in this location until highway is relocated. So everything in this park is kind of contingent upon something else. So the idea is that as opportunities arise, then we start to prioritize what work can be done. The also is that every component in here needs a final design and a cost estimate. That needs to then that all goes through the committee process, whether that's the Park Commission, ERC, HR, Finance, and County Board. We follow that process. It may be part of the budget, it may be a CIP request. We have to do public-private partnership for many of these items because we, as a department, only thrive with the partners that we have. Our mountain bike trails in this county were not built by my department. They were built by our user groups, and we help maintain them. The pickleball courts, that funding was provided by the pickleball club. We help build it, we help maintain it. The fair puts money into the facilities. Nordic Ski puts money in. So we as a department are responsible for maintaining all these facilities and helping make them the best that they can be. But we would not have the facilities in Marathon County without the partnerships that we have from these user groups. So that's something that's going to continue in Marathon Park. And final approval of everything, like I said, has to go through the committee process, and then the final funding sources will either be identified before or after that plan is in place. For the ice arena, one of the next steps is we have to do a feasibility study of some sort with all of the user groups to determine what exactly the need is. We know there's more need now, but what exactly that means, we don't know. What the contracts people are willing to sign, what their ability to utilize the spaces, what their financial, whether there's a return on investment, all that needs to take place. So this is not part of this plan. This is the master plan for the vision. All of that is to come over the next 15 to 20 years is the idea of that. So the next step with the master plan is that we take this back to ERC with some of the information that you provide us today, some of the questions that we get before that, probably January 31st meeting date. And then after that, we'll go to the HR Finance Committee meeting for their blessing. We're not asking for any funding for anything at this time. This is just the master plan. They've already paid for the master plan part of it, but there will be funding implications in the years to come with some of the items. And then it will come back to County Board. The plan is in March. That's the plan. So the next steps right now, besides we'll take any questions, is if you have comments or questions beyond today, you can either send them to myself or you can send them to Mr. Langenhahn from the ERC chair, and then he will make sure that him and I talk to make sure that we have those questions answered for ERC when we take that back through the committee process. So with that, I guess I can open up to questions, comments.
So, questions from the board. Supervisor Oberbeck.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the things I thought about as my nephew is going to University of, or in Michigan Tech, they've got a program where they have internships within companies that are, I guess, trying to get people to work for them. And there's a place called the Founders Club in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. And it's a reuse of a senior living facility to house interns for the summer when they're working with some of these companies and getting this new, I guess, new experience of of working and supplying the labor that's needed. And he's participating in that. Wondering if that has been evaluated as far as working with businesses. We've always talked about in Wausau or Marathon County about how to retain the younger professionals. And that might be one instance of how to rehab a building such as the dormitory. So I think that's something we should consider, because that has changed in the last few years. The labor market is very tight, and that might be able to get some millennials or people that to come back to this community and work within the community. So I guess I'd like to see something like that developed on the west side. And I was involved with the city of Wausau with the west side on 2nd Avenue trying to get that redeveloped, and that's started. So I would think that we would want to start to look at businesses. And I didn't see them listed as a stakeholder, but I'm sure some of them were contacted or whatever, but that might be something to look at. I guess the other thing would be, what about other parks within the city? Brockmeyer Park, when I was on the park committee for the city of Wausau, we looked at developing that and what's available there instead of trying to do everything at Marathon Park. Are we looking at other facilities in the area as far as spreading that out and taking advantage of those open spaces where they're not being very well utilized now? The soccer fields have went to the new facility, and that facility is open for some open space like pickleball courts or tennis courts. They've waited for that for lots of years. Walking paths, and that might open up opportunities for other development. I'm concerned about also housing in university space. I think the college really has to look at what they're going to do in the next 20 years. The park, the state, or the Marathon Park, what is it going to be to as far as a fair in the future? Is it going to grow? I see limited space as far as the main the main aisle through the fairgrounds. Should it be developed such as you go to the Minnesota State Fair and every space is utilized? There's music and whatever. Is that something that Marathon Park, Marathon County will develop in the future? We don't know how this area expands. Are we trying to do too much in too little space? And I think that should be looked at. Thank you.
Okay, next we have Supervisor Longenhahn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to thank Jamie and Jason for providing the presentation this evening, and that the next ERC meeting date is January 3rd. So if you have any comments or questions, please provide them to me or Jamie before that time. Thank you.
Okay, Supervisor Stravinsky.
Thank you. Couple questions. You have the new ice building out there far to the west up against 17th Avenue. And I guess I wonder why you would have it that far removed from the rest of the park area. The current ice building is really a multi-purpose building, and it gets a lot of use on and off the ice. So my question is kind of twofold. First of all, if we go ahead at some point with a new development for a new ice arena, what happens to the existing building? Do we have, has any planning, any thought process taken place?
Yes, yes. You want me to answer that? No?
Yes, please,
Okay.
at least briefly.
Yes, as part of this plan, and it's in the document that's also attached to your packet, kind of talks about each area individually, so if you read the number 17. So the idea of the new ice arena is that at least one sheet, maybe two, depending on the demand, would be year-round ice, which it now currently is not because the building's not built for it. We do have demand for at least one sheet year-round. So therefore, that would change the uses of it all year because there's ice on that part of it. So it's really not contingent upon the rest of the facility as far as separating the ice arena out. The idea here is we definitely could probably refurbish the current ice arenas as they are and use them as they're standing today. But that infrastructure of those buildings needs a lot of work. A new roof is needed, which is over $1 million. There is a lot of, once you take the ice sheets out, there's a lot of wasted space with all the locker rooms in there where the bleacher areas are compared to what it's used for. So the plan shows that if the ice arena is relocated, a new multi-purpose building would be built, and that would specifically work with the fair on making sure that it houses all the livestock that needs that area, and then it would be reused as it is today for a lot of other different events, but it would be a 3-season facility, not a year-round heated facility.
Okay. And the other question that I would have is, I see a distinct lack of parking development, and it seems like we have lots of area to the south of the park that would be available for parking. Unless I'm misreading your map. It's a little difficult on an iPad screen.
The parking is generally the same as it is today, with a little bit of reduced parking where it's gravel, but this whole area, 23, like if you're talking about fair parking, the fair parking really doesn't change other than this northeast road where some people do park now. This whole west side would be open for them to allow parking, as well as 23 south of that grandstand is for parking. So there is elimination of some parking, but with these being county-owned facilities, there is the ability to use some of this parking for some of those events, because we have the ability to program those. So during the week of the fair, if we needed parking, like around the ice arena, we could close the ice arena, so that's not a conflict. I mean, it's August too, so our ice usage is more during the day if there's a camp and not at night. So we would work with the fair there. So, and there's green space. I mean, we park a lot in the green space all over. Even on that plan in 1919, all of the parking is on grass on green space. So we do eliminate some, but not a lot, and we still do try to accommodate for at least what the fair needs.
Yeah, if you look at the fair and you look at Art in the Park, I would think those are probably the 2 largest parking events that we have there, and the parking is highly inadequate. So the last thing we would need to do is reduce parking. So thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you so very much. Again, if anybody has some questions or comments, additional comments, please get them to Supervisor Longenhan or Jamie in her department. So thank you for that. We will move on to item B10, the Standing Committee Chairpersons or Designees, reports. Vice Chair McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick update on the Infrastructure Committee meeting that took place on December 1st. We had an update from Supervisor Robinson on the broadband mapping, which provided an update on the coverage map so far on broadband. Also, Supervisor Robinson and Dave Mack from CPZ provided an overview of the approved transit plan by the MPO. We then had a discussion on the special events policy, which is ordinance 12.04. Basically, this ordinance needs to be updated. The ordinance was first discussed by Public Safety and Infrastructure Committee back in 2019, but no action was taken, basically due to COVID. It was discussed that it may be desirable to form a work group with members from the Infrastructure Committee, Public Safety Committee, and ERC to review this ordinance and bring back some recommendations to each of their standing committees. Supervisor Straub volunteered to be the representative from Infrastructure Committee to serve on this work group. We also had an update from Commissioner Griesbach on the possible future land site for the new highway department, which was discussed briefly before. However, the latest site that we were looking at, or they were looking at, was sold. So the search continues. We have no sites to be looked at this point. And that's basically a quick update on infrastructure. Thank you.
Okay, next we have Supervisor Langenhahn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two things. The first thing is that the Parks Director corrected me and by saying that the West Side Master Plan will likely be taken up on January 31st meeting because it sounds like there's some work to do in between then and January 31st, and January 3rd would be a little bit too soon. The other thing I wanted to provide an update for the county board is that the ERC is currently in the midst of updating chapter 17 and chapters 22 of our for our zoning code. Annually, the ERC goes through a update process for the zoning code. We engage with our towns who have county zoning for potential updates to be made for that code. Just to let you all know that if you have the town of Brighton, Easton, O'Plain, Elderon, Frankfurt, Green Valley, Gunther, Hewitt, Holton, Hull, Knowlton, Marathon, that's me, don't worry about that one. Macmillan, Plover, Reed, Rib Falls, Spencer, Ween, they are all under county zoning, so they will be contacted by our department. In fact, I believe they've already been contacted by the department for potential changes to the zoning code. So they will provide feedback. We take it into consideration. Staff drafts, we approve, and we send that to the county board for your consideration. We do extensive public engagement in this beyond just contacting the towns. We'll also be having an open house sometime in January for the towns to come in and take a look at the potential changes at that time. So we haven't gotten a lot of feedback yet, so that's why I wanted to provide an update that if you have any of those towns, mention it to them if you're at a town board meeting when you're providing an update, so that way they can give input during that process. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other committee chairs or designees updates? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to item C, consent agenda, items C11 through item C13. What is your pleasure? Motion by Vice Chair McEwen, second by Supervisor Zhang. Is there any discussion on the consent agenda, items C11 through items C13? Seeing none, we will proceed to vote. All right, and we'll proceed. And the motion is carried. Thank you. And we'll move on to item D, and that is appointments. Veterans, D14, Veterans Service Commission. I'd have to ask the clerk to read the appointment.
Reappointing Lynette Arnhart, Schofield Avenue, Schofield, to the Veterans Service Commission for a 3-year term to expire December 31st, 2025.
And what is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Zhang, a second by Supervisor Robinson. Is there any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, we will proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. And we will move on to item D, 15, Library Board appointment.
Reappointing the following individuals to the Marathon County Public Library Board for 3-year terms to expire December 31st, 2025. Supervisor Michelle Van Cray and Sharon Hunter. Further, upon approval of the board, appointing Catherine Palmer, Glendale Road, Cronenwetter, to complete a 3-year term to expire December 31st, replacing Jeff Campo. December 31st, 2023, replacing Jeff.
Okay, thank you. And what is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Leahy and second by Supervisor Zhang. Supervisor Shafinsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Given the strong and consistent public support that was showed recently, even tonight, we had people here commenting on the inappropriate nature of the books that we have in the public library, commenting on how they do not reflect the current will of at least a sizable portion of the Marathon County public, perhaps a strong majority. I guess we don't have a survey of everybody in the county, but that's what we're here for. We have very strong opposition to those books. A compromise was proposed, a compromise which was outright rejected, and given the testimony of the individuals tonight, was rejected with a huge display of hubris and overreach on the part of these elected or non-elected officials in terms of the library board. For that reason, I find both of these individuals, their judgment is completely suspect and does not reflect the will of the community at large. I will not support under any condition the reappointment of Sharon Hunter or Michelle Van Cray. I do not know Catherine K. Palmer by reputation or directly. The only comment that I will make is that apparently I've been told that she's been promoted highly to and highly recommended by Mayor Katie of Wausau. And you tend to associate with people of like mind, and I can't support her for that reason as well. I can't see that she's going to support the will of the large amount of Marathon County. Thank you much.
Supervisor Sandalski.
Thank you, Chairman. I had a question as the public position on for the library board. I had an email from one person who applied, yet they didn't have an interview. I was curious why we're not interviewing everybody that applies for these positions.
I'll ask the administrator to give an overview on his process that he utilizes for bringing appointments forward to this board. And I think it is a rehash of what has taken place in prior appointments. But nonetheless, I will provide the opportunity for him to provide the process again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The short answer to your question is I interviewed every person that I understand applied for the position, and I'll show you how individuals can apply. On the Marathon County website, there is a page for the county board, and specifically that page lists boards and commissions, and I have it up on the screen right now. And when as alluded to by Chair Gibbs, I gave a presentation some time ago, I think it was last term, about this process. But when I became administrator, the prevailing process in the past had been individuals would contact the administrator, as I understand it, or the administrator would contact individuals he or she would know and inquire if they were interested to be appointed to any of these boards, commissions, or committees listed on the screen. I instituted this practice whereby I have a form. You have the list of all of the committees for which the administrator by state statute is responsible. State statute and your rules is responsible for making appointments. If you click on the form, individuals have the opportunity to fill in their name, address, identifying information, check each of the boards, commissions, and committees they're interested in. They then provide a little bit of information relative to their interests, their qualifications, and other information you'll see. I ask for references. I haven't checked references on any, but I'll talk through my process. I also allow the opportunity for individuals to update and allow for the attachment of a resume or a curriculum vitae. My process then for each of the committees that is listed on this list is I do interview them. I had 14 individuals that have utilized this form since we began keeping records that have expressed interest on the library board. 4 of those individuals have, since their expression of interest, been appointed, confirmed, I should say, for appointment on the library board. The remaining 10, I called each of them and ask them a series of questions relative to their application. I craft those questions for every one of the committees or commissions that the board has, that I'm vested with making those appointments, based on the direction from the board through your rules in terms of what the mission of those particular bodies are. So for example, for the library board, I called 10 individuals. Of the 10 I called, the first question I always ask, which isn't in the list that I'm going to read to you in a moment, but the first question I ask is, are you still interested? Because I began using this form a couple of years ago, and I understand that people's lives change. 2 individuals that were within that list of 10 that were still remaining expressed that time wasn't right for them in terms of their continued interest for appointment. So I asked those individuals if I should keep their name on the list. They both indicated that they would appreciate that, so I did that. I then proceeded to interview the remaining 8 individuals, and the standard questions that I asked, again, are based on, at least in some part, the action from the board through your rules. I asked them to tell me a little bit about their self and why they're interested, similar to the question that was on the form. As it relates to the library board, I pulled the mission statement from the county board rules, chapter 2, and the question I asked was, the mission of the Marathon County Library Board is to, quote, enrich lives by promoting lifelong learning and actively providing the community with access to ideas, information, and opportunities to connect, close quote. What does that mission mean to you, and how would you work to accomplish that on the board? The third question that I asked was, and this was my judgment based on the comments that were made during the budget about opportunities for the improved relationship between the county board and the library board. So I indicated, and this was the question, one of the largest areas of responsibility for the library board is to manage and oversee the financial budget allocated to the library by the county board of supervisors. How would you approach that responsibility to ensure a strong working relationship between the library board and the Marathon County Board? The fourth question, again, a standard question I ask for every appointment. Is there any personal or professional relationship that you have that you believe would cause you to have a conflict of interest in carrying out your work on the board, committee, or commission, depending on which one it is? Thankfully, all of the respondents indicated the short answer of no. But I do use that as an opportunity to talk about, as Corporation Counsel has with all of you, that should a conflict ever arise, I ask them to make sure that they alert the chair of the body to make sure that that is appropriately addressed. And then the last question I ask is there anything else you wish to share with me, or if they have any questions they have of me relative to those appointments. So I follow that standard practice. I even, if I have only one individual, of course, I just call them to make sure that they're still interested. But I did that with respect to all of the applicants that I understand have applied. The form is an automatic form. If there's a constituent that's indicating they have applied and were not interviewed, I'd welcome the opportunity for you to provide that information to me. I'll personally apologize if they didn't get a call and our records show that they've applied. But our process is they execute the form. We send them an email thanking them for their interest, and I alert them if there's not a vacancy at the moment, that we will keep their information on file, and should a vacancy occur, that we would consider them. With respect to the process for reappointments, my process has simply put been, I think I'm following what has been historical practice, which is we reach out to individuals who have previously been approved by the board for those positions, and I simply inquire if they're interested in being reappointed. If an individual expresses to me that they are interested in being reappointed, I have historically, again, following what I believe to be the historical practice, simply brought that information to the clerk for posting for reappointment. I haven't gone to that list, to your question, Supervisor Sandelsky, because there is no vacancy, at least based on how I've interpreted past practice. If the board has a different direction that they'd like me to go in terms of considering those individuals or the practice for reappointments, I work for the board. You guys tell me what to do, I will gladly do it. That is my job. So that's been my process, how I craft the questions based off the mission statements for the rules.
Okay, thank you. I'll contact them back and see what the whole deal was. It just kind of sounded like they didn't get I guess maybe a proper response, but maybe I miscommunicated with them or something. And then the second thing I'd have to say is I cannot approve these appointments to the library board because they refuse to do the will of the majority of the people in Marathon County. As we know, we've been talking about this for a while with the books and all this, so that's pretty much why, because they're not upholding their oath to the office and they're not doing the will of the people. So thank you.
Vice Chair McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am no way criticizing the administrator for his appointment of these individuals. That's his authority to bring names to this board for openings such as the library board. It's our job on this board to approve or not approve those positions. The reason I feel we need to discuss these appointments is the controversy that the library board has been involved in over the past several months. I'm not going to go into specifics, but I did what I witnessed at the last two library boards meetings was a lack of diversity of thought. When this last vote was taken to consider any changes, it was a unanimous vote by that entire library board. There was not one person on that library board that really, I thought, was concerned about the concerns or the questions that the people at this library board had brought to their attention. I think we need a different direction on that board where people honestly look at all sides of issues, no matter what their political or personal beliefs are, no matter what the National Library Board is telling them what to do. I think we have to look at the current events and the people in Marathon County, what they are concerned about. And like I said, I don't think we've ever had a discussion on the library board. However, this library board did not leave us any else except dealing with what we can as far as appointing new board members. I will not be able to support any of the three people that the administrator asked us to vote on. I did not want to go in this direction, but I cannot sit idle after I saw how the library board treated individuals and the lack of concern that I think they felt as far as how these parents were concerned about their safety of their kids. And like I said, I respect the vote of the library board. It was unanimous. There's nothing we can do at this point. However, our job as board members is to reappoint people to this board. And honestly, with good conscience, I cannot do that. So thank you.
Supervisor Langenhan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Considering that there are two reappointments and one new appointment in front of us, my question is related to considering the actionable item as far as dividing the question. When would a motion be appropriate to divide the question?
Right now.
Right now? Mr. Chair, I would move that we divide the question. I don't know how much more detail I have to provide after that.
Is there a second to a motion to divide the question? The motion to divide the question will then require 3 separate votes on the 3 different appointees. Is there a second to that motion? Seconded by Supervisor Rosenberg. It is not debatable, so the motion before you now is a motion to divide, which will then simply separate the 3 appointments, 2 reappointments and the 1 new appointment to the library board. Is everybody clear what you're voting on? And just take a minute before we get to the voting. Again, it's a preferential motion and it takes preference over anybody's request to speak. So the clerk has to put it in the open meetings software so that we have a record. Supervisor Van Cray?
Could I ask that the clerk put the open meetings on the screen? Thank you.
Okay, so again, there is a motion to divide. But there's no debate. Okay, so the motion before you is a motion to divide, and that effectively will just make what would have normally been a one-vote vote, now a three-vote for each of the individuals separately. This is a simple majority. Is everybody clear what you're voting on? All right, we'll proceed to vote. We'll proceed. And the motion divide is unsustained, and so it is a tie, and so it fails. So the motion is, again, on the floor, is all three as one vote. And we will proceed with the return now to the people who have requested to speak. Okay, Supervisor Baker was next.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. So I'm going to, my objections are a little bit different than some of the other supervisors, although I do agree with many things that have been said. But I'm going to approach it more from a standpoint of our standing committees. So I appreciate Supervisor Van Cray's service on the library board, but I believe that we should have someone from the EED on the library board because that is the committee of jurisdiction for the library. We don't have anyone, neither of our supervisors are on the library board. We have at least 2 and perhaps 3 people on our committee that are willing to serve on the library board. And then I also disagree with the premise that once someone is appointed to a committee that they are just reappointed and not all applicants be considered. So that is an objection that I have. I don't believe that if we went back to our constituents and said, hey, I've been elected to the county board now, I'm going to just serve until I decide that I'm not interested anymore, that would probably go over very well with our constituents and appears to me to be a very analogous situation. And then my third objection is on middle of November, the 15th of November, I requested that we add an agenda item to the EED to have more information about who applied for the board and, be able to make a more informed decision on who the candidates were and if we wanted to confirm or not confirm. And I didn't get that on the agenda, and so I really don't know who the other applicants were and don't feel like I can make an informed decision, so I'm going to be voting no. Thank you.
Before we proceed any further, I'm going to ask the Corp Counsel to provide a little bit of context around whose appointments they are and whose appointments and how they're brought forward under state statutes. So I provided to, it's in response to Supervisor Baker's comments.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regarding these appointments, these are appointments by the county administrator. So state statute calls for these particular positions to be brought forth as appointments by the county administrator. They are subject to approval by a majority vote of this board. The appointment power, however, and the determination of who to bring forward as appointees is the administrator's. It's not the board's decision to make a determination of who is brought forward, but to approve or not approve whoever the administrator has brought forward.
Okay, next we have Supervisor Lemmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I fully support the appointments that our administrator is proposing. When I was elected onto this board, I was terrified. I'm terrified right now. The learning curve has been slow for me. I've asked a lot of questions to many people on this board, and one thing that I've learned is issues that seem common sense really aren't. So I talked with our library director. I've talked with several people who are on the library board, and it might seem really simple to move a book to an adult section or to take it and stick it behind a desk, but it really isn't when you have a Dewey Decimal System that everything needs to be categorized in order. And you can't, if you're familiar with maybe a stock room in a store, to change the whole stock room would take a long time. It would be very difficult and probably some new training. I have some issues with putting a children's book or a book for adolescents in an adult section, because then when they go find it, they're also going to see titles of other adult books that are written for adults. So that's my personal concern about taking that book out of the children's section. It's a book written at a level for a consumer to grasp. I do get concerned about putting a book behind a desk because that restricts access, and I don't necessarily think I would access most of these books on my own, but if I look at some of the students that I've had in my classroom who are curious and are wondering and need somewhere to go, I would rather them go to a book that has gone through the editing process than to the internet that has things out there that are not necessarily vetted. So I fully support Supervisor Van Cray and Mrs. Hunter and Mrs. Palmer, if I'm getting their titles correctly, for working on behalf of the people in Marathon County. I also would like to caution us about moving books because it's a slippery slope, and who's going to decide what other book is objectionable? And to say that the library board did not do justice to the people, the constituents who brought forth concerns, I would just like to say one of the books was moved to the adult section. They listened, they went through the process, and they moved the book. I'm not sure if the other books needed to be moved or not, but it went through the process, and they worked very hard. I don't remember what the hours were, but it was a long, long time that they took to read and study and look at experts. I think the board even said they would look at the process one more time, review it to make sure, since it was written up in maybe the 80s or somewhere a while ago. They've been very responsive, so I'm proud of our library board. I love the library. I am biased. I wanted to be a librarian when I was getting my teaching certificate, but I got married instead. Sorry. Anyway, thank you again for serving, Supervisor Van Cray.
Next, we have Supervisor Dickinson was last on the list before we switch to a vote. Sorry, Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I need a clarification. So from the administrator, so you did or did not interview for the 2 reappointments?
I did not.
Okay. So I agree with Supervisor Baker in his comment about that it's not necessarily the administrator's fault in that, but I wouldn't agree with having that as a process. So a second question would be, if there was an opening for an appointment, if it was a board member slot, would we have to interview and fill out the form for that as well?
I guess that's a really good question. I hadn't thought of it. Historically, these appointments happen during your organizational meeting, and the process that happens there is, as many of you just recently went through, you essentially fill out a wish list of, pardon the pun, around the holidays, a wish list of which committees, commissions, or boards you'd like to be on. And I have sat in a room historically with the vice chair and the chair and tried to match as best we could people's interests and desires to serve with the various appointments we get to make. I can't recall personally if I've had a situation where a county board supervisor appointment has happened during the course of a term. If that were to happen, I would probably, thinking off the top of my head, send out an email to the full board, or I would consult that list that you would have filled out in April. My sense, the easier course of action for me would actually be to send out an email and ask similar questions of supervisors as I ask of the public appointees.
Okay, thank you. The other opening, was that advertised in any way? Or did you simply look at, was there a period of time where that position was advertised? Or how were people made known of this other position that was open?
So there really is no advertisement for the positions other than when people go to the county website, it says, these are all the commissions, boards, committees that exist. And if you're interested, fill out the form. We don't have a posting time. I considered individuals up until the last moment, and I apologize if Supervisor Sandelsky, if one of your constituents applied and I wasn't made aware of, but I interviewed everyone who I understood to have completed that form going back to when the form was made available electronically until the most recent information I had, which I apologize if I didn't hit everyone, but there's not a posting deadline like you might have for a position, because as it's been my experience, vacancies happen when they happen. We had an individual that just based on, Mr. Campo contacted me, and just based on life circumstances, he said he could no longer serve. Vacancies happen without a whole lot of notice, and your board rules require me to make due diligence to have them filled as soon as practicable. So that's been the process.
All right, thank you for that. So generally, my comments are, I wish we would have had the opportunity to interview persons for the 2 reappointment positions. I think given the circumstances, I agree with what Vice Chair McEwen said, that we're in a difficult situation here. It would be nice to say, let's just give the board a chance to kind of moderate or, not moderate, but to kind of focus on these issues and move forward and that sort of thing. I do think there is a lack of public trust from some people in our county, and I think that puts us in a position where we simply have to say, let's start fresh. Let's put a couple other persons on there, and hopefully we can start making those amends and building some of that trust back with some of these folks. I understand the difficulty in what people will say about removing or moving books, but there also is a selection process to bring books in that I guess we would hope that there's being the same due diligence looking at the materials ahead of time, so that we don't have to go through, people don't have to go through the whole process to remove, which obviously is a very difficult situation for everyone involved. I will make, in that realm, there is a book that I mentioned to Ms. Hunter and Mr. Rayom, and I was, and gave them some imagery from that book, and I was told that I too would have to submit the paperwork and read the whole book. And I guess in that situation, I'm not telling them what to do with their policy and their process. I understand they have that, and they decide what that is. I think there could be a little more proactivity in that regard, given the certain situation. And so I was a little disappointed in that. And so I agree with Vice Chair McCune, and I will not support any of these nominations. Thank you.
Supervisor Baker.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. So I'm a little confused. I made a request to get information to make an informed decision on whether to vote to confirm or not. That didn't happen, and then, as I understand it, that was an incorrect request. That's, I wasn't asking to make appointment. I was asking to have information to make a good decision. So I would ask that Corp Counsel would enlighten me with any relevant state statutes and county ordinances that describe the confirmation process and what type of information we are to be provided. Thank you.
Corp Counsel can respond. Go ahead.
I don't have an answer off the top of my head. It would take me a little bit of time to put that together. I certainly would be happy to do that, but it won't be immediate.
Supervisor Van Craig.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I honestly wasn't planning on saying anything tonight because you all know who I am. You know my leadership style and my work ethic. But in the conversation that we've heard this evening, I have a couple of comments. First of all, for my colleagues, if you are going to insult me, you gotta at least have the courage to look me in the eyes when you do it. We're all adults here. Secondly, the idea that the majority of Marathon County believes that books should be moved or banned from the library is speculation. We have heard from a group, public comments on the radio, on Facebook. They're loud and they're upset, so it may seem like the majority. But in reality, for the first time in my life, I've been engaged in this community for 7-8 years. I have been recognized in public and I have been thanked for the work that I have done advocating for the library. And for me, that speaks volumes to how the community actually feels about this. And if you don't think that I'm working hard enough or doing enough to represent Marathon County, by all means, vote against reappointing me. I will respect the will of this body, but I'm not going to stop advocating for the library or for the people of Marathon County. Thank you.
Supervisor Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to speak in behalf of or support the candidacy of the three people advanced by the administrator. I think I've heard a lot of adverbs. We want people that will honestly act and look at all sides of the issue as long as they agree with our side, is my fear on that. I think what we need to do is put people in a position that have A, expressed an interest, B, are willing to serve, 3, are willing to learn from their mistakes and look at process improvements. And I think we have candidates that will do that, and I encourage the board to support them.
Supervisor Langenhahn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. I would just, and if I get out of order, please tell me. But I would just like to express my gratitude for the county board members that voted against dividing the question, because you have stonewalled certain people that feel differently about the candidates in front of us into voting a certain way. So thank you very much for not allowing us to vote the way we want to represent our districts. Thank you.
Supervisor Marshall. Supervisor Marshall?
Just called the question, Mr. Chair.
Question has been called. Is there an objection? Is there objection? With no objection, question's been called. We'll proceed to vote as soon as the remaining individuals who are on the request to speak have provided their comment. Vice Chair McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not trying to insult anybody. If I don't have a right to my opinion, and it was brought up by just a prior supervisor. As long as I agree with your opinion, it's okay. If I disagree with your opinion, there's something wrong with that. I'm sorry if I don't agree with your opinion. However, it's nothing personal. I will never make this personal. There were concerns from citizens that had reached out to me, and I felt they had a good concern or a legitimate concern, and I respect the ruling of the library board. It was unanimous. I'm not bringing up that. I just don't want to be put in situations like this again. So please do not try to make me feel like I'm insulting somebody. It's not going to work. I was a cop for 30 years. I've been insulted by a lot of people, but like I said, I'm not trying to insult anyone. Thank you.
That's the only thing the last comment that I will make is when the library board took up the issue, there was a lot of requests from Corp Counsel on definitions. There was a lot of requests from Corp Counsel as far as the legality of the books and the issue. And the one thing that stuck out in my mind was that there was 72 other libraries in this state that have those same books in the same area. And there was also a discussion about what is the potential liability to the taxpayers of Marathon County should the library board move those books. And the discussion centered around there potentially is a significant liability if the library, after going through the process, still came up with a result that said no, not to move those books, and then moved them anyway. So with that, we will proceed to vote. Oh, there's no vote on question because question wasn't. My mistake. We will vote on the question being called, so the next vote is question being called to end discussion on the appointments. So is everybody clear? A vote yes will end the debate. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried. And debate is ended. And so we will now proceed to the vote on the appointments of the three individuals, the appointments of Sharon Hunter, Michelle Van Cray, and Catherine Ray Palmer to the library board. And we'll proceed to vote. Supervisor Robinson, can you vote? Looks like, okay. We will proceed. And the motion is defeated. And we will move on. Civil Service Commission.
Reappointing Roger Luce, Southridge Drive, Rothschild, to the Civil Service Commission for a 5-year term to expire December 31st, 2027.
What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Lagenhan, a second by Supervisor Oberbeck. Supervisor Shafinsky.
One question, Chair. How long has Roger Luce been in this position? How many terms? Thank you.
I will look to the administrator. I do not have that answer at the tip of my tongue.
I likewise don't, but I believe I can find it if given a couple of minutes.
Supervisor Lamont, as the administrator continues to look that up, I will proceed with other questions. Supervisor Lamont.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was a little confused on that last vote because I thought you had said there were some people in the queue, and then you went ahead and gave a comment there.
There was two people in the queue, myself and one other person.
Were they given a chance to speak? Or?
Yes, they were.
Oh, but I want to withdraw my vote I am opposed to it. I don't know how I voted on that. So a yes vote would have been in favor of those
A
individuals?
yes vote would have been in favor of appointing those individuals. A no vote was opposition to appointing those individuals.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. No
So,
change.
No change?
No.
Thank you. Okay,
Not that I was on quickly. I just started notating names by appointments and.
we don't have an answer for the specific question as to at this point yet. We're still doing the research. Any other discussion? Supervisor Leahy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would administration or Corp Counsel be able to remind us, I guess, the next step in process? If appointments fail, do we go back to the drawing board? What's the precedent there? Thank you.
So, because these are administrators' appointments, the administrator would bring a new appointment before the board. So that's my understanding of the process.
Not finding anything prior to the term expiring, yeah.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, please, Mr.
Our best understanding is that Mr. Luce's term, he was appointed in October of 2021 to complete a remainder of a term for another individual. So this would be his first reappointment. So I believe he began serving in October of 21. Does that sound accurate, Kim?
Okay, any other discussion? The clerk's confirmed that he was appointed October of 2021 to fill the unexpired term of an individual who got off. Okay, Supervisor Lamont, still request to speak, or is that?
Yes.
Okay, Supervisor Lamont,
Mr. Chairman. It went so fast. Could I just have a clarification on what the vote total was on that last vote?
Was 20 to 12.
20 to 12. Thank you.
Okay, again, we're at the discussion on the appointment of Roger Luce to the Civil Service Commission. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. Supervisor Boop, please vote. Thank you, and we'll proceed. And the motion is carried, and that is unanimous. We'll move on to item D17, Executive Committee of the North Central Community Services Program Board.
Appointing Kurt Gibbs to the North Central Community Services Program Executive Committee for a 3-year term to expire December 31st, 2025.
What is your pleasure? Motion by Mask, second by Vice Chair McEwen. Any discussion? Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this would be outside of the guidelines and expectations of the county board chairperson, correct?
That is correct.
And this is this is a new appointment to the executive committee. Are you already on the NCHC?
I'm on the NCHC committee, NCHC board. Yes.
Okay, so that would be additional work for you, additional meetings to attend?
Currently, when the reorg took place, when this board authorized the new tri-county agreement, it created the executive committee of the North Central Community Services Program Board. At that point, the reorganization internally from the North Central Community Services Program Board elected me to the chair of the, well, I was already chair of the North Central Community Services Program Board, and then I was also elected then, at that time when the reorg took place, to the executive committee. So I already currently serve in that capacity.
So the only concern that I have is that we've had executive committee meetings moved a couple times, specifically because of NCHC-related meetings. And I guess I see your primary role serving the county board, not NCHC, and I just have the concern that we're losing, in a sense, more view to that board, and moving, well, it is kind of funny. But also that those meetings would be getting moved as well, potentially. That's something that, being on the executive committee, I put that in my calendar, and movements like that are difficult, as we've already communicated about. So I don't know if you have any comment about that you can quell my concerns.
No, I would say this, that since the reorg and since the new tri-county agreement and the reorganization and the vacancy of the CEO and the reorganization that's taken place down there, it has in fact taken a lot of my time. There is no question. In fact, this month alone, I think the executive committee will be at NCHC will be meeting 6 times. That's not to say, but I see that as a dwindling demand as the new executive director is brought on and the new management in North Central Healthcare is brought on in place and put in place. I see the demand for that committee meeting twice every 2 weeks and more frequently, dwindling to potentially once a month at maximum. Any other discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. Supervisor Lamont is. Wait till he returns.
We can't proceed without it.
Tony, you were supposed to be watching that.
I can mark him as abstaining.
I blew it. Is there a timeout corner?
Okay.
All right, he was, well, he stepped out, and so he is marked as abstained. We'll proceed with the result, and the motion is carried. Moving on to the North Central Community, North Central Community Services Program Board.
Appointing Liberty Heidemann, 605 Ross Avenue, Wausau, for a new term, to complete a term to expire December 31st, 2024, and then reappointing for a 3-year term to expire December 31st, 2025, Eric Anderson, Magnolia Avenue, Wausau.
What is your pleasure? Supervisor Hart with a motion, second by Supervisor Bushman. Any discussion? Any discussion? Supervisor Shafinsky.
One question, and this maybe is more appropriate for Corp Counsel. What we have here are a list of names. Is it permissible for the administrator to, as he brings these appointments forward or proposed appointments forward, bring forward with that some tiny amount, maybe it's 1 or 2 or 3 sentences of background, so
It's,
we have
their
a
resumes are in the
understanding.
packet, Supervisor Stravinsky. Their resumes are in the packet.
Okay, my
along-
apologies.
Any other discussion? Any other discussion? Okay, we will proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried. And we are down to item 19, Wisconsin Valley Library Services Board.
Reappointing to the Wisconsin Valley Library Service Board for 3-year terms to expire December 31st, 2025. Carrie Sweeney, Gray Place, Wausau, and Jim Backus, Luby Lane, Ringel.
What is your pleasure? Motion by Vice Chair McEwen, second by Supervisor Robinson. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried, but is not unanimous. And we will proceed on to the ordinances. Town of Rib Falls rezone, Terrence Marsh, ordinance 0-34-22. Motion by Leahy, second by Supervisor Zhang. Any discussion? Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed, and the motion is carried. And we'll move on to the Town of Plover rezone, Dan and Carolyn Krimmer, ordinance 0-35-22. What is your pleasure? Motion by Van Cray, second by Supervisor Hardinger. Any discussion? Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried unanimously. Town of Reed rezone, item E, 22, ordinance 0-36-22. What is your pleasure? Motion by Drabeck, second by Leahy. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried unanimously. We are down to item E, 23, revisions to Marathon County General Code, Chapter 16, Ordinance 0-37-22. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Ritter and second by Supervisor Dickinson. Supervisor Langenhan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize. During my update, I think I said 16 and 19 would be updated. It's 17 and 22 for the town engagement with the zoning. 16, I believe, is forestry and 19 is parks. If you had any questions of those updates, Tom is here for 16. Thank you.
Okay, any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed, and the motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. We'll move on. E, 34, revisions to Marathon County General Code, Chapter 19, Ordinance 0-38-22. Motion by Supervisor Shafinsky and seconded by Supervisor Leahy. Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed, and the motion is carried unanimously. Moving on to resolutions, item F, Forestry Rec Committee and Environmental Resources Committee, item F 25, to approve the annual county forest work plan, resolution 69-22. What is your pleasure? Motion by Mask, second by Leahy. Any discussion? Okay. Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried, not unanimously, but is carried. We'll move on to item F 26, application for Marathon County Forest Acreage Share Loan Payment, resolution 70-22. What is your pleasure? Motion by Mask and second by Leahy. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried. Again, not unanimous. We'll move on to item G, Environmental Resources Committee, approval of the Town of Rib Mountain Local Zoning Ordinance Amendment, Resolution 71-22. Motion by Vice Chair McEwen, second by Supervisor Van Cray. Supervisor Langenhan.
Very quickly, we're a popular group tonight, CRC members. The reason why these are separate from item E above for ordinances with those rezone revisions, just a little bit of information for the rest of the county board. Items 27 and 28 under G are town zone towns. So you can either have county zoning, town zoning, or have no zoning. That's why these are separated, if anybody was wondering. Thank you.
Okay, any other discussion? Okay, seeing none, we will proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried and is unanimous. Item G, 22, approval of the Town of Wausau Local Zoning Ordinance Amendment, Resolution 72-22. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Shafinsky and seconded by Supervisor Drabek. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried, thank you, and it is unanimous. We'll move on to Human Resources, Finance and Property Committee under item H. Item H29 is approving the 2022 budget transfers from Marathon County Department of Appropriations, Resolution R-73-22. This does require a 2/3 majority vote. What is your pleasure? Motion by Leahy, second by Book. Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried, but not unanimous. We'll move on to the item I, Environmental Resources Committee and Human Resources, Finance and Property Committee. Item I-30, amendment of the 2022 Capital Improvement Program and Funding Plan to complete Phase A closure project at Marathon County solid waste. This also will require a 2/3 majority. Motion by Supervisor Mast, second by Supervisor Leahy. Supervisor Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure which version we have before us. There are two versions in your packet. There's the version that came out of ERC, and solid waste, and the version that came out of finance. And the difference in them relates to funding source. When the Finance Committee originally approved the recommendation from ERC and then raised a number of questions relative to funding, and subsequently staff went back and evaluated funding sources and brought in a revision. The original resolution called for or money to come out of the county's contingency fund to be paid for, be paid back over a period of time in the terms of $288,267. Subsequent to our meeting, they found a source within the solid waste budget that did not make the contingency transfer necessary, and they will be, the resolution that came out of finance reflects the use of funding from the solid waste budget to pay for it. So I'm not sure which version we have before us, but I would hope that we would consider the version that came out of finance, very similar to ERC, but funding source difference, not relying on the contingency fund.
I'd ask the individual maker of the motion, Supervisor Mask, which version is your motion for?
The one out of finance.
The one out of finance, okay. The motion, so to be clear, the one that was approved by HR Finance originally and then at ERC has been substituted with the one that currently does not utilize county contingency. It uses internal resources from within the solid waste department, and that is the motion that is before you. Is that the understanding of the second? And that is the understanding of the second. Okay. Is everybody clear what resolution you have before you? So again, the resolution that you have before you is utilizing the $288,000 from funds within the solid waste department to fund the closure. Supervisor Robinson.
I'm sorry, I didn't remove.
Okay, that was my fault. Supervisor Gisselman next.
Just a question, is that the resolution that was in the packet? I mean, this is the, so which one did
Both of the resolutions, one was anticipated being approved by finance today. The other one was the one that was approved. So both of them are in the packet. It should be the second one that shows $288,000 instead of being borrowed from contingency from Marathon County's contingency budget. It'll be using the $288,000 from within solid waste's own resources.
So that was posted today?
It was posted yesterday.
Okay, I thought I heard.
It was posted yesterday, but it should be in the packet.
Today, thank you.
Page 182 in the packet. Okay, Supervisor Shafinsky.
Just one quick question on the wording. Given the fact that we have the two different recommendations, is the wording correct as it currently exists under I-30, or does that need to be modified just to make sure that everything is correct further down the road once we either affirm or deny?
The Corp Counsel will answer.
I think I-30 was worded in a way that allows both or either of the resolutions to be considered, so I think we're okay passing either one.
Any other discussion? Is it clear what you're voting on? You're voting on the resolution to authorize the funding from within the solid waste department to fund its closure or partial closure as directed by the department, DNR, of part of Bluebird Ridge. The administrator?
not to make anything more complex, but I apologize. It's page 180 is the resolution that was approved today by HR Finance and Property. Page 182 was the resolution that was approved by ERC and HR Finance previously. So the resolution you're voting on, just to make everyone clear, is on page 180 of your packet. Again, I apologize for the
No,
error.
not a problem. I want everybody to be clear on what they're voting on. Any questions? Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Okay, we will proceed to vote. Supervisor Lamont. And we will have him abstain. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried. And we are now down to miscellaneous business, announcements and/or requests. Administrator Leonard wished to address the board.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. You've heard me speak numerous times talking about how valuable our employees are. They are, as I frequently say, our most valuable asset. I wanted to take a moment just to recognize 4 individuals, 4 of our department heads, for whom this will mark the last county board meeting during their tenure as department heads. Melissa Johnson from the Solid Waste Department, spent 13 years in our Solid Waste Department. Our Sheriff, Scott Parks, has 43 years of service for Marathon County. Terry Kaiser has 35 years of experience, both with Marathon County and serving through North Central Healthcare. And Vicki Tilka has served in social services for 35 years. The first 3 are going to pursue any and all wonderful things as they move on from their county employment. Vicki has accepted a position, as alluded to by Chair Gibbs, as the Managing Director at North Central Healthcare, Managing Director of Community Programs, as part of that reorganization. So collectively, from those 4 individuals, we have over 125 years of experience. So my only ask of you, if you see them in the future, certainly thank them for their service. They have contributed greatly to Marathon County's success. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and I think we owe them a round of recognition, and thank you for their service and dedication. 100 and some years is quite significant as far as service to the citizens of Marathon County. Thank you. The clerk has announcements. She needs signatures from Environmental Resources, Forestry and Recreation, Parks Commission, HR Finance, Solid Waste Management. I also want to express from the chair a sincere wish for everyone and their families a happy holidays as we move through the holiday season. Any other announcements? With that, we are down to item number J, 32. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Wilhelm and second by Supervisor Seefeld. Motion by Seefeld, second by Wilhelm to adjourn. All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? We stand adjourned. Happy holidays to everyone.